developing in my brain, oh, let's see here. So what's developing in my brain as you're discussing the anthropological sort of dynamic of story through the ages, is there a piece of this because of our physical biology, because we are stereoscopic creatures, because our eyes are two and they look out this way and they create Z depth? The idea, like we always talk about virtual reality as creating these spatial memories, which are more powerful than flat screen memories, right? That actually derive a narrative, and you refer to the concept of memory palace. They build the idea of a memory palace because they're more like what our real lives do in our real biology in the real world. We develop spatial memories because of the space that we are in, because we see things in 3 dimension. And somehow those memories are more real and more powerful. The interesting sort of reference point that I used to give a lot is a good example of understanding a spatial memory is people forget a lot of things, but it's very rare that once you go to a hotel room and check into your hotel room, you forget the number of your hotel room because you've moved in space to that space. You put the key, used to be a metal key, now it's a key card, and you look at the thing and it says room 1242 or whatever it is. And you somehow know that you can trace a path back to that room and enter that room safely and get to your bed, to your safe space. So that's
Yeah,
a spatial memory.
the sequencing is
Guys,
really
right now
important.
we are actually live on LinkedIn. So I will do official introduction for
Okay, great.
Paul. And later on, I will also introduce Ted and we will dive in. So I have some introduction I have to read through because people probably don't know who Paul is. So I have to introduce, and also Ted, if you are interested in co-hosting, and later on, we will put you on the banner so we don't have to every time introduce you, and you
Sounds
will be
great.
the regular. Yeah, okay, cool. So today, thank you, Paul Tomlinson, to join us today. And Paul Tomlinson is a longtime software engineering professional with nearly 30 years of experience across several industries, including Amazon, United Health, and others, serving at every level from the IDE to the boardroom. He has been involved with XR since 2014 as an enthusiast, researcher, and developer, spending over 40 hours a week in headset, with interviews appearing in Time magazines and Wall Street Journal. Paul is currently working with Mural to explore spatial cognition and collaboration, and building an XR product for release with Meta later this year. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dominic, very much for that introduction.
Yeah, and Ted has been in the industry for a very long time. And also he is currently working in the Paramount picture as a futuristic. And pretty much the director in the field. So yeah, I will start kind of the interview, and feel free to chime in. And this is a flexible thing, and we want the idea bounce back and not just like a just one person talk for an hour. So yeah, start with Paul. How do you apply XR to the solution of all the XR design?
Right. So XR solution design, hot topic because XR, of course, is a huge industry. It's exploding constantly. New features, new technologies, all over the place. But it's one of these things where the technology is growing faster than a lot of the solutions. So it's often you can criticize it as a solution looking for a problem to solve instead of the other way around. And so people will take it and they'll apply it to the wrong problems or in the wrong ways. They'll have a bad fit. People will waste money. It gives it a black eye. And so there's a lot of disillusionment at the same time. People who have overinvested in technology without a good return because they expected it to be the next bubble. It wasn't. And now we're on to the AI bubble and so on. We'll see how those play out and converge later on. But it's still a really useful technology. It's still extremely powerful because of its ability to simulate anything to anyone at any time. depending on the level of fidelity and simulation that is appropriate or that you're looking for. So how do you then say, I've got a problem? How does XR fit this problem? And I think that's the first thing to say is not how do I take this problem into XR? It is what is my problem, and define that really well and say, what does XR do well? And then look for the overlap between the two of them. And instead of trying to move the whole problem into the XR space or take everything that XR can do and apply all of that to your problem, solve just inside of the overlap between the two of those circles. You know, that Venn diagram, and say, what's the sliver of the things that XR really can do well for this specific problem?
And Paul,
And
is
for
there
some
here?
case,
Here's
yeah,
a
go ahead, Ted.
question for you. Is when you say it's a solution looking for a problem, is it because of the way our technology has developed generation over generation and where we sit now with the last 40, 50 years of the advent of all compute technology largely being derived as some sort of flat screen experience, that we've mapped almost every problem to solve to a flat screen use case, to a type on a typewriter style keyboard, deliver those results on some sort of screen? And that lives in almost every industry, right? Heavy and light industry, air traffic control, healthcare, entertainment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea of finding the kind of fit and trajectory of solving those problems using spatial tools is still a fairly novel idea, although in reality, when we move off that, how we use a screen every day, right? And because of mobile phones, we become so 2D screen oriented. The rest of the world, once we have to, like heavy construction has to work in 3D spatial world, right? They have to get their bobcats and their cranes out and dig things and move things in a real space. And many industries, healthcare is a great example. When you're doing a surgery, you're not working in a 2D plane on a patient. You're working in a 3D object, right? Their body. Do you feel that there's, because of how we've all been trained into 2D, into living on a single spatial plane of some sort of screen, that it's harder than we all think to derive the benefit of moving that into 3D space, into a spatial environment?
Okay, so you asked like 6 questions
I
there.
know, I did.
There's a ton of inertia. We have spent trillions of dollars, beyond that even, but we have that much inertia and existing valuable content in the 2D space that is worth preserving and worth using well. And you're right, we do not have a good paradigm yet for popping straight from 2D to 3D. Saying it's now you can see it in 3 dimensions doesn't add value to things that have been optimized for being in a flat screen, or putting on a headset and just seeing more 2D screens. It's less expensive than putting up a lot of monitors, but there's not an immediate benefit to that unless you rethink the problem space and say, okay, well, what does it mean to have this much screen real estate? Well, now it becomes a way of externalizing my working memory and putting the whole context of the problem that I'm working on so that I can focus in on one nuanced thread without losing that context, without having to keep the whole thing in my brain. And that's a very freeing experience. So when you rethink the problem space of externalized working memory, of remembering where things are instead of remembering what everything is and keeping it in your brain, that's how you shift the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
But I think XR is a lot more than just 2D content. It's going to be what can be simulated well. And simulating space is cool, but let's take a moment and appreciate what XR really does. So there's a whole range of digital simulation that XR provides. So XR, just being the extended reality, is the very simple of I'm going to bring digital objects into my space, which you would do with augmented reality or mixed reality, all the way to the virtual reality of I'm going to take myself into a virtual space entirely.
Yeah.
and completely replace everything. And you've got everything in between that. And in that process, you have to choose which of those is going to be the right fit, and how immersed somebody wants to be. But all of those things, from the computer's perspective, it's just now, instead of having one screen, you've got two screens, one for each eye. The computer doesn't care. It's got some IMU information, right? It's got the accelerometer, and it's got some additional sensor fusion that gives it some positional information that then is just a feedback for the position at which to draw data to those pair of screens. But the XR experience, regardless of where you are on that spectrum of things with me or me with somewhere else, that happens in the brain.
Right.
The human is the connective tissue that makes an XR experience effective, in all of its many forms. And so designing around the human experience is what really matters. What does the human needs to get out of the problem that you are solving? And then how does XR come into that play?
Yeah, well, and Dominic mentioned it at the start of this, that you, and this was sort of a surprise to me because it's a lot, that you spend roughly 40 hours a week in some sort of XR headset.
Yep.
I consider myself pretty deeply involved in this industry. And I would say on average, I spend maybe between 10 and 15 hours a week, which I think is way more than most people. And you are way more than me. So you are deriving and learning, in almost a normal work day, 8 hours a day, week over week, living outside of a 2D screen plane, which we're on right now, right? And we could easily do this in a 3D screen plane using a myriad of devices, from the most pedestrian to the most exotic. But what does it feel like to you, being a human in the mid 2020s, living 8 hours a day in some sort of headset experience? And what are you doing in those 8 hours a day on those headsets?
Yeah, honestly, for even for a lot of my video calls, I will show up as an avatar because I haven't bothered to switch out of the headset between meetings. I'm using the headset to solve several problems. One, I'm designing a product in VR right now. And if you're going to be designing in VR, or
So you're
for VR,
working
you
in
should
the
be
medium
designing
that
in
you're
VR.
designing for, right?
Yeah, you really should be, because that's the only way that you can appreciate the sense of scale and the perspective. You want to be through the eyes of how people are going to experience what you're putting together. I'm using it, one, for the use case that I mentioned earlier of having that massive screen real estate. I've got 4 enormous screens. My small screens, my portrait screens out here on the side, on the periphery, those are my 12-foot portrait screens. And that's not a typo, that's 12 feet on the diagonal. And then I've got a couple of 25-footers landscape stacked on top of each other. And then I use
Are you using
software.
a number of different headsets, or have you landed on one particular headset that you're using day in and day out now? Do you swap between them?
I've got 4 that I use on a regular basis. So a bunch in the Meta ecosystem. I've got an Apple Vision Pro, like I can see behind your
Yeah,
guitar on your desk
we have
there.
one too. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got a bunch that I use depending on where my use case is at the time. But if my day-to-day work is a lot of regular computer type work that I just have translated into the VR space.
Right.
And I put it all out into that environment. And by overlaying all of my work in that canvas, I get it out of my head, for one, but it's also concentric. So all the way out here to the periphery where I might have to turn to look at it, that's my Spotify or my Discord, things that are an actual distraction, things that are reference material that support what I'm looking at, and things that I'm working on. It's concentric about how far away it is from
So you're basically
glance
building a
to
priority
turn.
system.
It is, and it just it evolved from that system over the last 5 years.
Yeah, kind of like we do in the real world, right? Outside of a headset, we put things that are really important, tend to be front and center. We put things that are maybe important for a moment off to the side, and things that we may rarely use, but sometimes use, way off to the side. And we can do that in virtual reality or mixed reality quite effectively. I think the biggest challenge, and see if you agree or disagree, is the physical ergonomics of wearing a headset all day long. The weight dynamics, and as well, we did the last, I'm actually there's a lot going on. I'm actually in the midst of leaving Paramount. The last official thing I did was a couple weeks ago at South by Southwest with my friends Roni and Charlie and Joanna, talking about the Apple Vision Pro and all the amazing things about it and all the shortcomings of it, of which there are many.
Big shortcomings.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we should probably table that for a whole nother episode of this, because if we go down that rabbit hole, we're never coming out of it, and we want to talk more about you. But Dominique, I'm dominating the discussion with Paul, so you probably have some questions you want to ask from your perspective.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that inside VR or XR, you want like something like tangible. But right now, if you see Vision Pro, it's all 2D flat screen. What do you think about, for example, like if you played Pillow? I heard from Ben Irwin. He mentioned, like during the interview for my book, he mentioned that Pillow is the breaking through, or the app that bring people from 2D screen to tangible. For example, if you play Pillow, you can see all the ships you just grab and slot into that circle. And when I was working at Meta, I was told your head cannot tell you cannot let user tilt your head, because this is uncomfortable gesture. But for Pillow, it's all the time you look up. You are not looking horizontal or look down, because for best practice, when we design user experience, we like to do things a little bit down because it's comfortable.
15-degree down.
Yeah, a little bit down. So, so Pillow pretty much break all the rules that I've been told in the past, and also bring us from 2D
Well,
to 3D.
I'll cut it here for a second,
Yeah.
because I can tell you why, and Paul will probably agree with this. This is
Okay.
starting to go down that rabbit hole that I don't want to go down.
Okay.
Part of the reason that you want to break those rules of the Apple Vision Pro is because it's so damn heavy and so damn front weighted that the best way to wear it is actually leaning a little back and resting your head like this.
That's why.
Like there's all kinds of third-party developers, and I've been customizing, developing, kind of working kind of the weight dynamic of it to balance it, because you need weight on the back of your head to balance the fact that it's so heavy on the front of your head. But truthfully, like, you can understand who designed this thing, and they were flying on first-class airline seats a lot, or private jets a lot, not in economy, right? And they're sitting on very comfortable couches or recliners, leaning their head back and looking up and out this way into the world. So you mentioned that that sort of puzzling game called Pillow, which is great. But you know, and there's stuff that's coming in the sort of three-dimensional world. But clearly Apple has not made that a stress point for their device, whereas Meta has absolutely made it a stress point for their device.
And not only that, but they also don't have a real theory of spatialization yet, because all they have given you are little 2D screens to play with. They do not know how to bring things into an environment. Who is it? Ben Lang at Road to VR has a really good critique on just basic window management in a 3D working environment. I'll just say go read that article, because I'm not going to rehash all of his points. But you're right, the ergonomics are huge. All of my headsets have been tricked out for maximum comfort. So I've got hygiene is good. So I've got facial covers that are easy to clean or easy to remove and toss in the wash. I've got physical balance. And so I've got either halo mounts or some kind of counterweight to them. And then I've got other strapping systems that move where that center of gravity is.
Yeah, you sound very similar to me. I custom and mod all my stuff pretty, you know, if you're in it as much as we are, you got to mod it, right? It's like you're a race car driver.
The total weight isn't that bad. People wear hard hats all day long, or a welding hat, or other.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. If you balance it, it's professional headgear of this weight class has been around for a very long time. We know the ergonomics of that problem. It's only an issue if it's not weighted correctly.
Correct.
The other thing I'll say too, for the ergonomics of being in VR for a 2D, well, a very large 2D work screen, of having things around me, is I'm not ultra static. I'm not in a fixed position looking at one thing. And having a constant set of small movements, moving around and looking around all day, I have way less neck strain. I don't get up and like snap and crackle when I'm done. And the focal plane is far enough out there that my eye relief is more comfortable. The color contrast, the bias relief is a better match to the work that I have going on. It's also it's like noise canceling goggles for your eyes. So I have less eye fatigue. I've got less neck fatigue. I've got lower cognitive fatigue, higher area of focus. It takes a lot to dial in. It is not an accessible paradigm yet, but I am an early adopter nerd who is willing to put up with the warts in order to get to the magic, and find out, okay, how do we make that magic more accessible? So that's what my solution is for my regular workplace. But then I'm also using it for, like I said, design tools. So I'm in there using it to design, like Shapes XR, fantastic tool, highly recommended for any kind of design work that you're doing. I'm using it for work, or excuse me, for meetings, I should say. So I work with people distributed around the globe, 3 or 4 continents, meeting all manner or all hours of the day. So we hop into the same place and have spatial memories and shared history that we develop in that space, and are able to turn to people and gesture and have side conversations. And even though we're reduced to digital puppets and cartoons, those digital puppets and cartoons, you immediately accept them as being that person because their mannerisms come through and you learn how to puppet them effectively. The voice is there, the gestures are there, and the behavior is there. And so you just relate to one another. You get past that threshold very quickly, and you just go on with communicating. So we meet in space much more often than we meet on video. And so I use it for all of the above. And then when I'm done with that, Busman's Holiday, I'll also go play with it. I use it for
Right.
music and for art and creativity and for flight simulators and you name it.
So let's go back in time a little bit. Do you recall your first VR experience, the first time you put on a headset, what you did, what you saw?
Yeah, Tuscany demo, Oculus DK1.
Okay.
And my first experience with that was a little bit nauseating,
Yes.
like a lot of people,
Like me too.
especially because it did not have positional tracking. You were only looking at three degrees of freedom. And what I remember most was my brain was upset with me because of the somatosensory deafferentation.
Yeah, there you go. You've got the actual medical term, the nausea
Right.
effect, the magic
Well,
mushroom.
no, this was actually something else. My brain was upset about the sensory information that was missing. So the Tuscany demo in the Oculus DK1, you're in this little villa, Italian style, and it's like, okay, why, when I move from outside or from inside to outside, why don't I feel the sun on my face?
Oh, all the tactile
Which direction is the wind coming from?
right.
What is the temperature and texture and moisture content of that stone? It wanted the rest of these details. And the screen door effect on those first headsets were
Of
horrible.
course.
And so I take that off and I think back to it and I don't remember the screen door. But I
Right. Yeah,
do
that's a good
remember
point.
the
I don't remember the
space.
screen door either, but I know it was there, but my memory filled in the gaps, which is interesting.
And then my memory started filling in the sensory gaps as well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my brain is doing something with this illusion. This is compelling. Actually, my first VR experiences were way before that, but that was my first modern VR experience.
Yeah,
that was
because
the one that was
mine goes
magical
back
for
to the
me.
90s. Mine was at a place called
Yeah.
Disney Quest with the Aladdin Magic Carpet Ride VR experience that was running on an Onyx and a custom-built CRT-based headset that weighed 14 pounds, but was very well balanced, so you didn't feel it on your head. So you figure, 45 years later, Apple could have learned something from that, but didn't. At least not yet, anyway. And that's interesting that you make a delineation between your first kind of consumer-oriented deliverable of VR versus your first touch points of VR, which a lot of people talk about sort of Damocles, and I talk about the Aladdin Magic Carpet Ride, really the first kind of like outside of industrial use cases, consumers like regular Joes could go in and try something
Yeah.
out. And that was in
And
the
it wasn't
90s.
even that. I'm going back to what I'm thinking is what set the bar for me is when I was looking at something versus when I was in something. And Tuscany demo was the first place I
Right.
felt like I was in something.
That's a good point. The spatial creation.
And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I think we mentioned a lot of like a headset, and I was too young to try all the 90s thing. I probably was still a student, like junior high school, so I haven't really tried those. But it's great to hear all the experience, and yeah. So Paul, you have a great understanding, and also from the beginning of the technology, and same as you, Ted, pretty much you guys knock out all the history of the headset. And also for those headsets right now, even though it has been a long time, but right now we start seeing the flourish of XR or AI or spatial AI. So maybe if you can address what types of industry that is like currently need like a visualization and AI, because I heard of people that says that every industry needs AI, but not necessarily XR. Because if you heard that Orion Bar, I remember a long time ago, he mentioned XR is the interface of AI. So we, for example, for doctors, if they wanna kind of see who got the cancer, they only need to insert tons of 2D images into the language model, and then it can come up with a result. And sometimes you can use the hearing assistant, AI assistant doesn't need visualization. So what do you see XR as a visualization part to help bridge the industry gap?
Well, it's interesting, and it'd be interesting to see if Paul agrees or disagrees. I see that there is almost no industry, both modern and historical, that has not found a use for virtual reality or mixed reality. I can point to almost every industry and just tick them off the box and say someone has been doing this. The bigger question is not does it get adopted, but why is it not more sticky as we sit, call it 10 plus years from the real advent of the commercialization and sort of home and work usage of VR on normalized computers, and now the computer's just in the headset itself. Because every industry is using it in some fashion. Universities are using it in research projects. Healthcare is using it in various ways. Mining and heavy industry, light industry is using it in many, many ways. Socialization in all forms, communication is using it in many ways, but it has not gotten anywhere close to what I'd call mainstream, like 2D compute is massively mainstream. Everybody uses it globally. Billions and billions of people are touching 2D compute on a minute by minute basis in our world, but exponentially smaller amount are touching 3D spatial use cases inside either a virtual reality or mixed reality headset. This where I leave it to Paul to maybe have some insights as to why is it happening all over the place, but it's not tremendously sticky yet.
Yeah, barrier of entry is still huge, and you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things really important to look at is why and how the 2D use case became sticky. And for computing, that was Lotus Notes, right? It was Lotus Point. It was the spreadsheet. It was no longer having to do your math by hand when you were keeping the balance sheets, and that was why it went from being the providence of universities and nerds into everywhere. And even then, it took a long time to go from you can do recipes at home to games to entertainment to something that became adopted. And that adoption curve was fought by people who were still fine with their typewriters and secretaries. They had people to fill in the gaps.
Right.
And it was not until you had a group that grew up with the advancing technology in the school systems, in the universities, and brought those expectations with them of there are faster, more accurate ways of doing this. If I can bring this tool set with me, we're going to see the same thing. It's going to require, I think, a generational shift of people who grow with the ideas of how to think spatially and bring those with them into the a working population. So as that cohort ages in, we're going to see the expectation, we're going to see the tools that
Yeah.
open that up more.
Well, and we certainly
so-
brought it from static to mobile. And in the process, we shrunk our screen down, right? We had
Yep.
bigger screens in our static environments. And then we made a choice because people like to be mobile, right? We're bipeds and we like to move around, that the technology and all the effort and research and dollars started to get poured into the kind of biggest device you could fit into your pocket or your purse comfortably, or let's call it uncomfortably now. And it's kind of like a little pinch point. It's like now we look at a much, much smaller screen and we figured out much more advanced UI UX to navigate around that world, and we connect it to the cloud computing infrastructure. So we have a screen linked to a much larger compute infrastructure. And I think
Yep.
the dream for people like us, we are starting to realize that dream. For many people, they still haven't had their first experience in that dream. You had it back with an Oculus DK1, and so did I, was if I can get what I now been forced into this little piece of real estate into a much bigger piece of real estate, but in roughly the same form factor, except the difference is I'm not holding it, I'm now wearing it, and I can explode my real estate. I've got all these other possibilities to use it. And that's why we're seeing so many people adopt it. But yet that gap, that sort of like, how do you get it to the every use case is better in XR than it is in 2D? I haven't seen that yet. And we're sort of a perfect proof point of it. We're doing it right now. We could easily have done this in XR, but because Dominique is linking this to LinkedIn and that's a 2D world and this makes more sense in 2D, we're doing it in 2D. But we have all our devices sitting around us, just gathering dust, waiting for us to use them, right?
Yeah,
So,
I actually try engage VR in different, for example, educators in VR and also XR Woman. They have like engage VR events, but it's so hard for more people to join it. It's pretty much a exclusive party for people. It's not accessible for the world. So that's why we do 2D. Yeah, and also I remember that the reason why XR is not fully adapted to the massive is because Amy Lemaire mentioned 3Cs. Cost is too expensive. Comfort, it's not comfortable, right? And content, it's not enough content, or the content is not important enough, measure enough for people to use it. It's not worth it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I would actually disagree with two of those three. I would say cost has been largely solved with a Quest 3. It's just a few $100s. It's cheaper than your smartphone in actuality. Comfort is a huge one that has still not been conquered. Content, I think there's a tremendous amount of content in almost every vertical out there. So I don't agree with that. I think there's massive
but we
amounts.
don't need like XR. I personally think that YouTube, or like when I learn, for example, when I learn things, I go to YouTube and it's enough. And I actually join a coding class in VR. I wanna take it out. I just wanna watch YouTube. I don't know, for some reason, I just couldn't really learn anything. Like something to cause my brain, I couldn't really observe, but I just watch it too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe my brain was not designed spatial or virtual spatial, or it's not comfortable. Yeah, that's
Well, but at the same time, the things you're learning from YouTube, if you're learning coding, you're learning a 2D discipline.
Right,
If
you're
you're
sitting in
learning a
2D
3D
plane.
discipline, if you were to apply, say, an AI filter that said, all right, AI, make this 2D video a 3D video and put me inside of it so that I can look at this from all angles at all speeds and see what this artisan is doing so that I can copy this process along with them. That learning experience would be way more engaging for any three-dimensional activity, any inhabited embodied experience, any learning of an instrument or learning of a craft. I think would be much more engaging, or an opportunity to see the world from that perspective. But I think to answer you, Ted, I think there are three factors that are in the way. And one of those is definitely a major agreement too with you, Dominique. And one is the physical comfort. It's got to be small and light and portable before it can enter into the fabric of everyday life beyond an intentional, I've charged it up, it's well maintained, I can now put it on my head for an hour kind of experience. If you're going to take it out into the world where it can blend with the world, it needs to be small, light, easy. We're going to get there. Waveguides and the and quantum dot emission type technology, we're going to have the breakthrough that gets it to something that's more socially acceptable and more physically capable.
No
So
doubt. Yeah.
I expect that problem to be solved at some
Yes,
point.
I do.
You, Ted, mentioned the cloud infrastructure. That's going to be huge because that also helps with making the device lighter and offloading a certain amount of compute. You still need an arm's length compute, has to be on headset because that's where the blending happens, where you need the sensory has to be immediate for the immediate feedback. You don't want lag. You don't want always to have 5G bouncing back and forth before what you're going to be experiencing. So you want some things local, some things remote. So cloud compute is going to be huge for that and for enabling our ongoing access to existing infrastructure. Something that we're experiencing more as people are bringing work things in, and Apple's good for this one, is our interface is being decoupled from the compute infrastructure. So we don't care where the compute is happening. We just care, is what I need to work with happening in front of me? But we can move more of that into the cloud. And once we do that, then the whole cloud is accessible to run any version of whatever we need on our content and still produce our results. So
Yeah.
cloud infrastructure is going to be important. And I think the last one that I had mentioned that for the 2D world was the killer app. And everybody's wondering, what's the killer app for XR? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? Is it going to be social? Is it going to be something? And I think none of those quite hit on the point that the killer app for XR is you. It is the person, the human, and the fact that the mass of digital infrastructure that we have around us, the glass tiles that we carry around to see our world that we're communicating through right now, these are they're part of how we conceive of our universe. They are extensions of mind. I use this to reach part of my brain that lives somewhere else. This is my portal. This is my access to that content that belongs to me, that because it is a part of me. It belongs to me not as a possession, it belongs to me as a limb. And all of these different things, they're just different portals through which I expand myself into the universe.
Right.
And I think once that expansion feels more seamlessly integrated, and this is something that will be a kind of a slow reveal as the technology can begin keeping up with that expectation. And as the infrastructure develops and as we decouple app from environment, from tools, from instead of one app rendering everything, we're going to have different apps rendering different parts of your experience. I think as we evolve toward that kind of digital fabric enablement, that's what's going to help us get there. And it's going to be multiple pieces. One, the expectations of a younger cohort aging in, that's going to be huge. The technology leveling up, and then the infrastructure and design vocabulary is also. I think we've got to solve all three of those problems.
Yeah.
Before
You bring up
what we see is going to happen. Go ahead.
Yeah, you bring up some interesting points. And Dominique and I were talking about this yesterday, and I think it's be interesting to get your perspective on it too. I am very much convinced that there is not one wearable device that will be the Lord of the Rings device, that will be the one that rules them all. And as we're chatting, Dominique put in our chat this company called Brilliant, which is
Yes.
doing a ultralight, and
Yeah, what
very
do you
sort of
guys think
sparse.
about this? Should I buy it? I'm just so appealing, but I know that advertising words versus because if you pre-order it, you can get it around April 15th.
Mhm.
So nobody has any reviews. So I think this is super cool because it has AI, it has visualization, and it looks cool. So what do you see this thing? And it's totally outside of Meta and outside of Apple. And it's pretty much, I would feel like you probably need to do more like there's no current like a big platforms, no ecosystem. Well, how do you see this independent
Well,
startups?
first of all, I think you absolutely should order it because it's part of your R&D and what you want to learn about all these different devices.
Mm.
I think it will have many limitations, But I think the larger point is what you're asking yourself is, why would you want to order that when you already have a Quest and you already have an Apple device and you already have a Vive and maybe a couple other things, is because just in the way we use 2D compute in different form factors. We all have desktop computers, we have laptops, we have tablets, we have phones, we have watches. Those are all just different form factors and sort of born off the same tree. The idea of creating a tree of VR devices, I think in the fairly near future, everyone that does what we do will have 5 or 6 daily use devices. And then the rest of the world will sort of catch on 5 to 7 years later, because like one of my sort of big challenges, and I'm curious if you see this the same way, is why do people in the R&D and product development world keep trying to make these things look like glasses when they're not ready to look like glasses yet, when they're too heavy, they're too big, and no one is going to wear them on the street, to the point of like, why are you wearing that, right? I mean, this was part of the issue with all these things, is they need to be like visors for quite a while until we get to this quantum sort of dot level, light field projection and light field mapping that will make them like your glasses. So my instinct is we'll have as many 3D devices in our world as we do 2D devices in our world, with various form factors, some that are very light touch, that will look like glasses very soon, that will only provide a small amount of that digital landscape, that digital information, and other devices that we use more in our home, more in an arcade, more in a work environment, that don't need to look like glasses at all and won't ever look like glasses.
I'm right there with you. I think we're going to have quite the blend, and we will always have the bigger, heavier, bulkier, more powerful one. Just like we have work PCs and we've got gaming PCs.
Right.
Totally different class of devices. We're going to have people for whom the simplistic waveguide type tech is going to be good enough. The threshold of good enough is going to get low, and the technology is going to get good. And somewhere in between the two of those, you're going to have something that brings digital to the masses in a way that's not going to be the everybody feels like they have a wizard-like command of the universe. Instead, they're going to feel like, I know what's going on, I know what's around me, I never forget anything, and I feel capable and secure and comfortable no matter where I go. That's going to be the first use case. And then there's going to be the wizards who feel like they rule the rest of the universe. And there's going to be kind of this blend. And that's, to be fair, that is the thing that feeds all nerd ego that we absolutely love. Right. And then you're going to have people who also have the holodeck level technology that is indistinguishable from reality, that has a tactile element that takes them into the unreal intentionally, as ways that is an augmentation of things that level of technology can only provide, where you go into non-Euclidean spaces, where you invent worlds with a thought. That kind of technology should exist for all kinds of explorations.
You and I are in
and
absolute
will feed
violent
into
agreement
other places.
there. We agree 100%. Yes, that's good. That's interesting.
Yeah, what do you
And I'm going to own
see?
all of them.
Yeah, me too. Well, it's our lives, right? It's our job.
What do you see right now? There's like a robot. If you see like a GTC, like an NVIDIA's like a event, I saw like, for example, Human. They are doing like an AI pin. They are trying to skip the XR visualization, and also robot. If you have robot, I know like for in NVIDIA's show, it seems like people can remotely control and doing some chores. For example, like working in the warehouse, but somebody in another country and using VR to work remotely. What do you see like these types of technology transforming XR? Yeah.
Oh, I think telepresence is huge. Telepresence for risk mitigation is absolutely critical. Taking people into environments that would otherwise be too hazardous, that would be too difficult. If you want to augment a human's strength, you have to give them power tools of some kind. You got to give them bulldozers or lifters. Those are big, those are heavy. Those don't go into human-sized places. Or you can try and give somebody an exoskeleton, but you still have a human inside of that taking risks. and we're still not very good at building exoskeletons. Robots can be built to a variety of sizes, and if they can take a human input and translate that into a robot output, you can accomplish wonderful things. And you can give them different tools, different actuators. You can send them to places of high radiation, high extreme extreme temperatures, pressures, chemicals, places that you could not safely put a human, or for purposes of exploration. I think the risk reduction side of that is huge. I think the work amplification is huge. Yeah, telepresence is going to be, I think, where you still need to put a person or an entity of some kind to perform physical labor. I think that's absolutely worthwhile.
Yeah,
Using it for warehousing is weird, but yeah, go ahead, Ted.
So one of the things that has been the missing factor there was the advanced visualization of the telepresence. Like we can build the devices, we can build the robotic devices, like we've been building drones for years and these little miniature tanks and things that can move around in places that humans are not successful or it's too dangerous. But we've been using cameras from a generation ago to create the visual experience. So I think if you extrapolate talk about killer apps, one of the potential killer apps that is yet to really be fully explored in the Apple ecosystem is the idea of the spatial capture universe, that you can use the headset itself to capture memories in a spatial way. And you can also use the latest iPhones to capture memories in a spatial way. Now, imagine applying that kind of spatial capture technology to a robotic tank that has to go into a war environment or a fire environment or a dangerous, close to a volcano. And up until now, we've just had 2D video. Yes, it's high res. We can get to 4K or 8K, but it's just 2D video. When you actually get spatial video, so the person that is in that telepresence environment can literally feel like he's there because he's feeling the three-dimensional environment around him, in a volumetric way. That's when that sort of next level of win starts to happen, in my opinion. We've solved a lot of the problems of the mechanical side. We just haven't applied extraordinarily advanced visual side. And interestingly enough, I think Apple is the first one to commercialize the idea of a spatial capture environment. So I'm very excited about that. I think that's going to take telepresence to the next level, personally.
Yeah, and
I agree.
yeah.
I'm a little upset that I don't have night vision in my Apple Vision Pro. You can fake it with some of the LiDAR,
Sure.
but with these telepresence, they should be able to see an infrared and X-ray and have ultrasonic sensors that translates to visuals. These things should come not with just a human analog, but with superpowers.
Yeah.
We can go into immediate human augmentation at the same time.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it'll be
go ahead.
interesting to see. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Apple in a Gen 2 or Gen 3 product leans into that a little more, actually leans into these truly professional use case applications. Because they talk a good game. They want to get into healthcare. They say, oh, these devices are going to be great for healthcare. But really, it's a Mac on your face is really what it is right now. But their technical capabilities of some of these spatial sensors and all of those cameras on that device do show the promise of what you're talking about. I just think it's not in today's world yet. It's they're still kind of becoming a very refined toddler in this world. They're not a grown up yet, so it's interesting to see.
Yeah, and if you see like recently Apple released a patent which they are trying to put the all the health data, and I think for example Apple Watch is like collecting all your body, and also for example when I go out for a walk and there's like all my steps per day.
Biometrics,
So
sure.
yeah, so pretty much I think Apple device can really truly help the healthcare, and healthcare I recently talked to a Stanford researcher, doctoral researcher. She was like, oh, actually, I really want to learn UX UI design. I was asking why. And she said that because I want to come up with a product. I want to create something because right now there are a lot of gaps in the medical industry that need some help. And I was like, oh, all our creators, because we have like a 20K creators in our community, and they are creating a bunch of games that doesn't really make money, and everybody was trying to apply jobs. So that's why I was thinking about, yeah, is there any way that we all familiar with this technology? And today, actually, in San Jose, there are a workshop, in-person workshop called Vision Pro workshops for all the developers. So how can we like facilitate or bring all our creators to different industry to lead them who should they work with, and we that everybody who work in XR field, not just having a close party, everybody just like a talk about some fun stuff, but we actually use our skills to help other industries solve their problems. Yeah.
Yeah, we saw this in the early days of VR, kind of when we got to the DK2 status. There was like this interesting community of people that were seeing the promise of this, right? And we would gather together very much often in Silicon Valley in these sort of VR community events and things. And we often did it at the computer museum in Silicon Valley, which was kind of interesting. Old school meets new school. And I think as these devices have kind of entered their sort of attempt at being more commercial, we've lost a little bit of that cohort stuff, right? And of course, because we had to deal with COVID, everybody sort of got separated physically. So we're doing a lot of this virtually now, and we continue to do it virtually, but it's not the same as gathering and having a coffee or a beer or a cocktail with your friends and kicking it around. There was this environment called VRLA that we used to go
Oh
to
yeah.
back in the day, right? And that was important to a lot of us. This was in the days where way before we had any kind of mobile virtual reality device, everything had to be tethered to a PC. And that was the state that we were at. Now, of course, we're in a mobile environment world for the primary use cases. Actually, we should save this maybe for another time, but Paul would also be a really interesting person to talk to about the nuances of inside-out tracking versus outside-in tracking. The
Oh, yeah.
short version of this is that in part of the heyday of VR, in the Oculus computer with cameras and the Vive with the Vive lighthouses,
The lighthouses, yep.
it's a completely different form of virtual reality when the external sensors are tracking the headset where it is in physical space versus the headset itself bouncing a camera out to the world and then returning that information. Maybe we could talk a minute about it because I see you've got this wry grin on your face because you're probably one of the only other humans on the planet that actually knows the nuance I'm talking about. We have given up something to get something, and we've given up a lot to get something. So maybe a minute or two on that.
I absolutely adored the elegance of the Vive solution, especially because it was just math. It was just timing, because it used an infrared flash and a laser sweep. And it was, when does that angle of laser hit you after you hit the flash? And the sensor just counted, and it said, okay, flash 1, flash 2. And between flash 1 and flash 2, all of the rest of the math said you are here.
Right.
And it did it at high resolution, high precision, high frequency. And the accuracy of that and the fidelity of it was immediately embodying the proprioceptive feedback of that value was massive.
Right. And we're talking 2016 to 2018 timeframe, maybe even a little earlier, maybe 2014. But some of those early Vive experiences that Valve had created, with that partnership, remember that Portal experience, it was just mind blowing, and nothing on a Quest is that mind blowing. There were things in the early Oculus that were just mind blowing because of the way the cameras read the positional space so instantaneously and created really, really tight deliverable. Now, the trade-off is, of course, we have a device now that's very, viable and usable and doesn't have to be attached to a big gaming PC and run these wires all over your house and sensors and stuff. So it's a give to get, but I would love to get to a third state where we have a modern version of ultra, ultra tight, precise tracking maybe they can do it in an inside-out way, but nobody, I think, has put a lot of energy into that anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, because it's good enough and cheap enough.
Yeah.
I agree, though. I think, the rate and accuracy of the LiDAR tracking inside of the Vision Pro, the spatial illusions that it creates are rock steady.
That's true.
So we're starting to get there, but that's the illusion of the things. It's not the illusion of the person.
Right.
So you're not inhabiting it in the same way.
Right.
So the promise is starting to get there on a portable device.
Yeah.
But one other thing I wanted to cycle back for a point that you mentioned, Dom, too, in the AI side of things, and how that is going to be important in gluing a lot of this together. And I think it's going to be especially important in navigating all of these gaps and in helping to glue things together that are otherwise too complex or changing too frequently. So in the same way that an LLM, the large language models are making predictive elements out of lots of different stuff that it can then associate effectively and come up with an answer on your free inquiry, we can do the same thing with associating lots of technologies, lots of services, other people, and use that to help people who would otherwise be casualties of this rate of change and help bring them along with it. Because one of the audiences that can benefit most from this ability to conquer space and connect people across distance that comes with XR is the age and place population. People who are becoming elderly or who have physical limitations, but for whom the technology is inherently inaccessible. Creating something that closes those gaps for them, that is patient and aware and can navigate it effectively, is going to be a huge boon to that specific group. So the elderly group especially, or to people who have physical limitations.
Yeah.
So navigating change is something that AI is going to be really, really good at. And I'm excited to see how that amplifies the social impact of XR, as well as just making things more practical generally.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a wonderful talk, and talk start with all the experience design and focusing on the human center, because all the technology, even though it's right now it's still clunky, very hard to use, or not comfortable, a lot of device, but we want to make it more kind of human centered, and also help other industry to bridge the gap using the XR technology and AI technology. Yeah, thank you, Paul, become our guest today, and thank you, Ted, joining us the first episode. I hope this topic you like, and right now we are pretty much live on LinkedIn. Right now we have 24 people watching online. We have tons of comments. Yeah, feel free to go to the page, and there are a lot of people like very interesting. And while we are talking, they leave the comments, so you can check. And also next week we will invite Stephen Christian. He is currently a very young guy, only 32 years old, if I didn't remember wrong. He is currently a doctor in his like a medical degree, second year of a doctor degree student, physician, and he also a Unity certified artist. He said that the reason why he did all those wonderful stuff is because his background was animator, and because he want to showcase his animation, and he start drawing comics, start telling stories, and later on he's transfer. He has biology degree, and right now he's a physician, like in training. So he also bring all the AR into his final exam in the medical school. So we will hear a lot of interesting side from the creator part, and he also wrote a book, and also kind of push his entire comic books entertainment into the TV show. So we will have another discussion focusing on medical degree, biology, and also entertainment. Okay,
Fantastic.
cool.
This was very
Awesome.
fun. Paul, thanks for spending the
Awesome.
time with us.
Yeah.
Really interesting
Thank
discussion.
you so
Yeah,
much, Ted.
and
And Dom, it's a pleasure.
yeah, thank you so much, and see
Okay.
you next week. Bye-bye.
Talk soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice. That was
Cool.
good.
Yeah, I just turned the LinkedIn. Give me a sec. I need to turn this off as well.